This is the Guns Magazine podcast, episode number 64. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting people who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. I don't think anybody would argue that most shooters are natural-born tinkerers and do-it-yourselfers. Then, when you mix that type of personality with precision-crafted firearms, the urge to dive deep into the guts of that gun is almost overwhelming. To support your quest into the inner workings of your favorite gun, in today's episode, I'm talking with Roy Huntington, a longtime gunsmith and machinist. During today's chat, we talk about how he got started, the dangers of the Dremel tool, easy gun modifications anybody can do, and the stuff even he won't touch. Best of all, Roy shares his mistakes so you don't have to. Now here's my discussion with Roy Huntington on DIY gunsmithing. Good morning, Roy.
Good morning, sir.
Did I drag you out of your shop?
Well, you know me being retired now. I think I come home and Susie says, "Who are you again?"
Well, the reason I mention that is because today we're going to talk about DIY gunsmithing. And that is such a hot topic. People are stuck at home with pandemic and they've got time on their hands and, they're wanting to do something. So we thought this would be a great time to talk about the do's and don'ts of doing your own stuff.
I know real gunsmiths and they're really talented people. I wouldn't put myself in their category, but for some reason I was a gun crazy kid, since I was just little, like so many people who read our magazines and listen to the podcast and whatnot. And so I started hobby gunsmithing when I was about 12 or 13 years old. And somebody gave me a rusty .22 rifle. And for some crazy reason, I just felt the need to fix it. And I couldn't stop myself. And so that's when I first started learning about how do you get the rust off? What's cold bluing? I never heard of that before. How do you refinish a wooden stock? How do you take the gun apart? I mean, it just was. And then once I did it, I just went, oh, Lord, this is really fun. I love doing this. And then it just continued. And then I would say in my late teens, 18, 19 or so, 20, was when I really started getting a little more serious. I had a little bit of money. And so I started buying better tools. Before I was using the garage tools, the hammer and a file. And
which is rule number one we'll get to here in a minute.
Well, then that's true. You don't use your garage tools. But I started collecting tools and then starting reaching out, and those were pre-internet times. And so you had to buy actual books and read them. And because of that, my library now, I've got probably about a 3,000 book library with primarily sort of gun history and gunsmithing type books. And and they prove themselves invaluable constantly. And then so I just got better and better and better, mostly working on my own guns. And then the word got out that I could fix guns. Then I started doing that a little bit. And it was never really a vocation for me because I was a policeman and doing other things and gun writing. I did open up a gun store with a business partner in the early 80s. And people immediately started asking us if we could fix guns.
Sure. And
I thought, well, yeah, it depends. And so we started taking guns in to be repaired. And then I sold that business out to my partner. And then later on and over the years, actually, I still do it now. I often will take in gunsmithing from area gun stores.
Yeah.
And so it's just been fun. It's a pleasure. You make a little bit of money and all you do there is just buy more gunsmithing tools.
I was going to say, you look at, the Brownells or catalog or whatever, and there's a tool for everything. And, let's start right there. I've at least learned enough to know you have to have a good set of screwdrivers above all else. And, there's hundreds of boogered up action screws in my past from using the 99-cent, screwdriver. But talk about tools in general. Do you need a full suite and a CNC machine? And if a guy wants to work on his own guns or maybe help out buddies, what do you really need to get started doing that?
Well, that begs the question, which is, what is a gunsmith and what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And that's where you need to start. And for me, I like to make things with my hands. And so that was an early sort of example of that. I enjoyed the making rusty metal be shiny again.
Yeah.
And, but I think for most people, and this is what I've learned as being a handgunner and you're seeing certainly with your readers now, is that a lot of them get a little bit frustrated because they need some work done. And there are fewer and fewer gunsmiths in the world today. And that's one of the questions I remember I asked or was asked all the time. Hey, Roy, I've got this broken gun. Do you know anyone I can send it to? And it's getting harder and harder to find somebody, nowadays. And so I think most people want the ability to fix or modify their own guns. It's like, gee, they want to put new sights on the gun, but they don't really know how do you do that? And I don't really want to send my gun to someone to put the sights on. And I don't, I have my grandpa's broken 22. I would really love to fix it. I just don't know how. Yeah. And so once you make the decision that, no, I don't want a career as gunsmithing, because that's a whole nother thing. If you want to go to gunsmithing school, do all that kind of stuff, or really become a serious student of it and watch 1,000 YouTube videos and read our magazines. But generally, if you're just a person and I want to learn how to fix my sights or really detail strip my guns or learn a little bit about cold bluing, well, you really don't need that many tools. But you are exactly right. The first thing you have to do is go to Brownells and buy a set of the Magna Tip screwdrivers. And, because you have your past history of buggered up screws. I do too. Yeah. Virtually every gun anybody ever brings me has buggered up screws on it, which, by the way, I usually fix them all because I don't want them to think that I did it. It's like, hey, these screws are buggered up. No, I got it that way. But they never believe that. But the Gunsmith screwdrivers are hollow ground, and so that way they fit the screws better. And then if you keep your head on while you're unscrewing the screws and screwing them back in, you won't bugger up your own screws, as it were. But I think if you're fixing, like sights and grips and, just general little, maybe you bought a Wolf spring kit for your Smith & Wesson revolver and you want to install it. Well, that's a classic example of something that someone could do, but you need to have good screwdrivers. You need to have a place to work. It would be good to have a little vise, a padded vise, and the associated tools are not like mechanic pliers. Although I'm not saying you can't use that kind of stuff, which you can in a pinch, but, a good set of needle files and a good set of picks that you can use, to reach in, good tweezers and punches, for instance, a nice small hammer, all that kind of stuff. We've written articles and, our DIY gunsmithing annuals. And I think both of the ones we put out have what basic tools do you need for gunsmithing? So I guess we could put a link to that.
Yeah, we could do that.
So I think if you decide, though, that you want to fix your own guns, then that's very, very affordable. I would say for $200 or $300, you could buy enough entry-level tools that would really get you going.
Yeah. And wouldn't you agree it's pretty important to keep those tools just to work on guns? Not be changing the carburetor on your pickup? Using the same stuff.
I know. It's like when you see your wife come in from the garage and she's got your Gunsmith screwdriver set and a hammer,
No,
like, wait, honey, can I help you with that? Then they look at you and they go, what?
What about power tools? Because I've got to get this term in here. We've talked about a lot. Gun plumber, kind of the antithesis of the gunsmith. The guy, well, I can fix that. And the first thing he tends to grab is the Dremel tool. Or, if you see anybody approaching a gun with a Dremel tool, in 99% of cases, that's a bad thing. Grab your stuff and leave. But what power tools do you need?
You're exactly right. That's one of those here, hold my beer moments, and I wish you could see the guns I've seen that have the classic Dremel tool modification, which is you can see where they've been grinding and then you see where the Dremel tool gets away from them. And there's this like skittery contrail of grind marks running down the receiver onto the stock.
No, that's checkering. That's checkering.
That's right. Yeah. That's a performance modification or something like that. But actually, Dremels have place
Sure.
on the bench. I use a Fordham tool, which is like kind of a fancy, Dremel tool. They do have their place. I couldn't live without one, but boy, you really have to learn how to use them, and you need the proper tools. The little Dremel kit that you buy at Home Depot, I mean, that's a good start, but most of the attachments they have with it are really not things you're probably hardly even going to use.
Right.
You need sort of specialized tools and stuff like that. But I can't stress enough, all this kind of stuff is what is it Clint Eastwood said? A man's got to know his limits,
limitation.
Yep. And I got in way over my head so many times over the years where, someone would bring you something and say, hey, can you fix this? Sure.
Well, you made the point one time you get a lot of bag guns.
Boy, bag o' gun. We used to get that at our gun store. And then other gun stores that I've sort of worked with over the years, they'll call me up and say, hey, again, I got a bag of gun. And you go down there and they're most often Ruger standard auto 22 pistols.
Okay.
Because the old models, they were really kind of complicated too.
Yeah.
They're easy to take apart and impossible to put back together.
Yeah.
And so when I worked behind the counter at gun stores, people would come in sheepish, and they would have a paper bag usually or a shoe box or something, clunk onto the counter and say, oh, my brother took my gun apart and I can't get it together.
Yeah.
It's like, no, he didn't. You took this apart. Now pay attention. I'm going to show you how to do it. The other one I should get a lot is a Marlin Model 60 22s, which they made 81 million of them, I think, and they're still making them. Those are also sort of easy to detail strip and impossible to get back together. There's a few other guns like that. Colt revolvers are that way. I don't know why people do that. It's like, if you don't know how to do it, don't take your gun all the way apart to have you fix them.
Oh my.
It's absolutely amazing. I mean, I would say 1 out of 10 who bring a gun in, because I would always say, it's unloaded, right? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They look at you like you're stupid.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, of course it's unloaded. I'm bringing it to the gun store, to have you fix it. And then I'd run the bolt on the 22 rifle and a cartridge would pop out. Yeah.
Wow.
And they would go, oh, I'll be darned.
I thought it was unloaded.
It's like, really? Well, you were pointing that at me as you carried it in here. So, and tube feed 22s seem to be the big offender there.
Really?
And I think the reason for that is people pull the tube out and then they dump out the cartridges.
Yeah.
Well, there's usually one still stuck in there.
Yep.
Like right ready to be chambered, basically.
Yep.
And so then they rack the bolt. And so what they do is they kick the one out that was in the chamber and chamber the next one.
Reload it. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, and then they think, oh, well, I took that. It's like those people who run the slide on a semi-auto and then they drop the magazine and they think they've unloaded it.
Not so much.
Then they get to hear, what is it? That's the loudest noise in the world, which is a gun going off when you didn't think it was going to.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah. So be careful, everyone. That's rule number one is, all guns are always loaded. So if you're going to work on your gun on your workbench, I mean, just clear it. If I have a bare frame of a gun on my workbench and I'm working on it, I swear to you, every time I pick it up, I look at the chamber.
I'm the same way.
Yeah, I've had a few exciting moments.
Well, and that's something, it's a topic for a different day, but like you said, people look at you like, well, of course it's unloaded. But yet there's so many people every year that are wounded and killed by unloaded guns. But yet the professionals that we've been blessed to be around and guys that literally handle guns every day and have for decades, they tend to be the guys, they'll check it multiple times. And like you said, I know every gun that I have in my closet, in my safe is unloaded, but every one, I will never point a muzzle at myself. I just, even if the gun is disassembled, I just feel weird doing it. And, it doesn't hurt anything to be overly cautious, but man, if you're under cautious, it just takes that one time.
And it is just that one time. And I've seen the ADs. I've had one or two in my life, and it's just terrifying. Yeah. And that if your familiarity does breed, not contempt, but it's like a lax.
Yes.
You get used to it. And that's why, like you say, real professionals are so conscious about it, and will never be offended if you take a gun from them that they just checked in front of you and you check it again.
I always
do. As a matter of fact, that's how you impress people.
Yep.
or it should be. Yeah. So you said something earlier too about what tools do you really need? I think a lot of people go into this and they think they need to have a milling machine and a lathe right away. And there's a guy who writes for us, JB Wood. Jay is basically a lifelong gunsmith. Jay had the gunsmithing column in Guns and Ammo. He had the gunsmithing column in Shooting Times. He's written for the NRA. He's written for Guns. He's written for Handgunners, everywhere. Gun Digest, everything. He is one of the most accomplished, I call it fix-it gunsmiths that you'll ever know in your life. And I've consulted with him many times. Hey, Jay, I've got this, backward shooting Bujakowski 11 millimeter pin fire revolver, and the sear's broken. And he'll say, okay, well, look, here's what you do. He'll fix it. And Jay does not have a lathe, nor has he ever had a lathe, and he's never had a milling machine.
Yeah.
And so, as he told me one time, he said, if you want to become kind of an advanced hobby gunsmith, just get to know the local machinist people. And then if you stumble onto a job you need some help with, you just have the professional do it. He said, because that way you don't mess it up anyway.
Yeah.
And, and you just charge your customer whatever extra you need to charge. And that way you don't have to live with a lathe and a milling machine, which I happen to live with. And
of course,
I mean, I have to admit, it's really handy. As a matter of fact, just last night, my wife Susie needed of all things, a pottery tool. They have this, it was like a little smoothing tool, like an X-Acto knife looking thing, and with a pointy end. And she was lamenting the fact that she had broken her last one. And I said, well, you silly girl,
I've got thousands of dollars of tools just waiting.
Yeah. And so 10 minutes later, I had a new and improved and better and faster and shinier and everything piece, And so, no, I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not had my lathe. Although there is something that we used to call, I can't actually use the actual term that we used to use because now we're all woke and we're not allowed to say anything that's demeaning to any other race or creed or anything, but it was a lathe, but it was really a electric drill. And if you have an electric drill, you have kind of a mini lathe there. True. And you'll be amazed what you can do with it. You can clean up screw heads. You can make firing pins. I mean, it's very versatile. It's quite surprising. Yeah. And if you invest in a decent quality drill press from Harbor Freight, they have a little X and Y axis vise that you can bolt to the table. So you can clamp something in that and then move it, left and right and back and forth. And so you can have a really light duty lathe, mill. So if you take your time, you could cut a sight dovetail, for instance. No kidding. The only thing to keep in mind is a drill press, the way the bearings are set up, they're made for up and down pressure. Right. They're not made for sideways pressure. So you do have to kind of be careful, but I wouldn't worry about it. I would get a good drill press because there's going to be a time where you're going to want to drill some, decent holes, precision holes, get a good tap and die set in the sort of gun sizes, 648, 840, scope mounting kind of sizes. Cause those are things that even if you don't drill and tap a hole, they're great for chasing threads when you get a buggered up thread or something like that. So, So no, you don't need all those tools, but I think if you're passionate about it, you'll ultimately want to go there.
Well, it's interesting to think that the Kentucky rifles, the Pennsylvania rifles, a lot of those were made with a forge and a hammer and some files, and they're still considered, just beautiful works of art that shoot really well. So that, and then I'm always fascinated, and this might not be politically correct, but by third world engineering. You see some water plant that, it was a 1956 Chevrolet and, an ox cart, and they cobble this stuff together and it works really good. And it's because they don't have the resources to order a new well or whatever equipment from Sears and Roebuck. But, they put together basically the junk they have lying around. So sometimes I think since we are blessed with so many available resources in the 21st century that we tend to order stuff instead of think, how can I do that?
That's one of the charming things about this for me. I enjoy working on old guns, and frequently the parts aren't available.
Yeah.
And so even though Numerich Arms and Jack First Gun Shop, and, there's a lot of places like that. And I do look if it's something really complicated, but there's a lot of times though, where I'll manufacture a part. A couple of days ago, I made a kind of a complicated screw for a custom old Model 95 Steyr rifle that I had. It would have been absolutely impossible for me to find this part. But I was able to just kind of take my time and, and so you turn it on the lathe and cut the threads and shape the screw head and cut the slot, the channel. And then when you use it and put the rifle together, it's so satisfying, and I would say don't let those kind of things scare you away. The key thing though is that know your limits thing.
Yeah.
It's just, don't get the Dremel tool and the $5,000 Browning superposed shotgun.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question. Is there, you don't call yourself a professional, but you're just this one step this side of it. Are there jobs you won't touch?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There are some things that I know that there are other people who are smarter than me, and I would rather have them do it. If somebody says, hey, could you build me a custom target rifle? No.
Right.
Could I fumble my way through it? Probably eventually. And I would learn a lot while I did it. But I would direct them to someone who, hey, this guy builds target rifles for a living. He's got all the tooling to do that, And so I'm mostly a repair-oriented kind of guy. I was going to
say, are there repairs that you won't touch?
Yeah, I think, and certain modifications. Like right now, I'm working on some Smith & Wesson revolvers. I bought some old revolvers I got a good deal on. And so what I'm doing is I'm customizing them. And if you go to Tiger Woods' website, what's
Tiger McKee?
Tiger's, what is it?
You mean Tiger McKee?
But
you said Tiger Woods.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Tiger McKee. Don't go to Tiger Woods. Yeah. Shoot Right Academy.
Yes.
I think that's his name, right? Yeah. You'll find him online. You'll see he modifies Smith & Wesson revolvers and turns them into really handsome fighting pistols. Shortens the barrel and slabs the barrel and just does some real fun stuff. And so that's well within the ability of what I would call kind of an amateur, gunsmith. And I think there's a lot of people who I would call like amateur car mechanics, but who actually are talented, and can really repair cars. And really the only reason they're amateurs because they don't actually have a business and that's what they do for a living. But really they're very qualified. And there are a lot of gunsmiths like that. And I'm kind of chasing that a little bit. I could handle probably 90% of the jobs brought into a general gunsmithing place. But if you want to rechamber a rifle or, there are some things like that, anything having to do where it's going to affect the pressure, it's like if I'm going to fit a rifle bolt on a 60,000 PSI cartridge, I would really want to know what I'm doing before I mess with that, which brings up the next point. And that is, let's say you've got your tools and let's say the people at the Brownells catalog know you by your first name now. And, your garage is being taken over with all your gunsmithing tools. Trust me, your friends are going to call you up and are going to want you to fix their guns because that's what they do. Right.
Yeah.
And it might be grandpa's old trapdoor Springfield, that needs a new sear welded up and recut. Or it might be something as simple as, hey, I bent the tube feed rod on my 22. Most people would have no idea what to do. But really, you can just go online, order a new one, make sure it fits, drop it in. There you go. You're a big hero with your friends. But there's nothing wrong with taking jobs from your friends. But just remember that you've now basically engraved your name on that gun. And so if you mess it up, you may end up buying them a new whatever it is. But the other thing is that if somebody says, hey, can you do an action job on my revolver? Well, if you have the talent to do that, that's fine. But if you mess it up, or if the revolver is then later used, in a crime or an accidental shooting or something like that, you're very much in that, evidence line. You as a police officer, me as a police officer, I've seen that before. And so you just have to really kind of use caution because you likely don't have the liability insurance if you're just a hobby gunsmith guy. And so When I take jobs from outside, I have a personal liability policy to specifically cover things like that. And I also won't take certain things. Sometimes people will say, "Hey, I've got this old broken, top break revolver or something," and I just go, "You know what? I'm not going to work on that, because if you fix it and then they do something stupid with it, like shoot a modern smokeless round in it or something like that, so you have to, and that only comes with experience, I think. So I don't want to say this to warn anybody away, because I really recommend it. Like if you go to Brownells and just do a search for like basic gunsmithing kit, and they've got a kit that has just the things we're talking about: punches and a hammer and little parallel jaw pliers and the correct screwdrivers and a mat and it's like all the kind of basic things that frankly most shooters should have. I would recommend adding a sight pusher if you're going to be messing with sights. We just reviewed that Real Avid one.
I was going to say, I've got one, and they're incredible.
Amazing value for less than $140 or something like that.
And you can kill a muskox with it also, because it is one serious piece of equipment. One thing that I've always kind of chuckled, but it's really serious business, is when somebody says, well, I can lighten that action up for you. And they get their side cuts and, run far away. But there's so many guys that think that's just perfectly okay. I'll take a couple coils off that spring and away we'll go.
And you brought up an excellent point, because that is probably the thing that gets people into the most trouble.
Yeah.
And because people don't understand something, is that yes, you can buy a Wolf spring kit. And yes, you can drop it in your Smith & Wesson revolver or your fill-in-the-blank gun. And yes, the action will probably feel lighter. But the challenge there is that it may still be gritty, because you haven't fixed the other part of the equation, which is the fit of the parts. Because most factory guns, it's not so bad today with CNC, but more inexpensive guns or older guns, they tended to not be fit quite so well, unless they were expensive guns like Pythons or something like that. And so putting a spring in a lot of times will make the action feel lighter, but you'll feel the grit more. Right. And so you need to know what are the dynamics to when I go in and start reshaping things. And that's where people really get into trouble. Replacing the springs, you can't really get in too much trouble there. But if you decide that, I want to polish the sears, or I want to regrind the hand, or so, that's like danger.
And I'll use my Dremel tool.
Yeah. And 1911s are classic, because they're just about anybody can take a 1911 apart all the way down to the last little pin. Right. And then, so they look at that hammer and they look at the sear and they go, well, I'll just polish that up a little bit, and then I'll put it back together. Well, virtually all the times they do. And they do it with the single action sear on revolvers, especially Smith & Wesson and Colt revolvers. Usually not Colt revolvers, because they're too complicated to take apart. But Smith & Wesson revolvers, usually people can get them apart. And then they see that single action sear and they say, I'm just going to, polish that up a little bit with a file or something. And then when they reassemble the gun and they cock the hammer and the hammer just falls down, or they can push it off, which means you cock it. But if you push it with your thumb a little bit, it just falls. And then with 1911s, you'll see they'll shoot and then the hammer will fall, or they'll shoot and it'll double, and they'll say, hey, what the heck happened, man?
But it's real smooth and light.
It's really smooth and light. What I have found through the years is that actually it's never a good idea to cut springs, coil springs. And that's not the proper way to lighten a gun. You need to buy a new spring, or you need to modify the spring to make it less powerful, because the length is really critical, because springs are supposed to work by compressing and expanding, and if you shorten it, well, then it doesn't have the same work. It can't do the same work,
right?
And so Smith & Wesson revolvers are famous for that. People take the trigger return spring, they snip off a couple of loops, reassemble it, and hey, that feels a lot better. But what happens is it changes the dynamics of the action itself, and then also they'll find sometimes the trigger won't return forward.
Yeah.
And then they do the same thing with the mainspring. They'll narrow Smith and Wesson leaf springs, and then they'll grind on them and they'll bend them and they'll do all these kind of things. And then usually the gun doesn't work, or else they'll back out the set screw, the strain screw on the bottom of it, and you'll get a really nice light action, except the problem is sometimes the bullets don't go off, right?
Well, I had an engineer explain that to me, that, guys do all these modifications, and if you don't know what you're doing, those engineers are real smart guys and gals.
They are.
There's certain equations that have to be met to make the gun function and operate safely and all that. And if you're just going in there kind of roughshod and clipping stuff or putting new angles on them, you're basically saying, I know more than a guy that's been designing firearms full time, for 30 years or whatever. And that doesn't make a lot of sense.
You're right, because it's like, some redneck like me with a beer, pulls the spring out and throws it away and says, that's bullshit. I know more about it than that guy who with a PhD in engineering who designed it. Not too long ago, I had a 1911, and it was from a guy who was an older guy like me, and he had some arthritic hands, and he was having a lot of trouble running the slide on it. And so first he tried cutting the spring to make it lighter, so he could run it, and then the gun would run correctly.
Right.
And so then he came up with like a 8-pound recoil spring. It should be like a 15-pound maybe, and so it was from a 9mm. So he put this 8-pound recoil spring in there. He said, "Yeah, it shoots really good now, and I can run the slide really easy." But it was a 45. And so I showed him where he was slowly beating his gun to death.
Yeah.
And he was also having some trouble with it chambering around sometimes, because the spring was just not right. But that's where it's almost like a hats off to John Browning. He designed a gun that worked reasonably well in spite of the fact that it had been mutilated badly.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point. I didn't think about guys that talk about, they've got hand strength issues or whatever. And that's a huge deal as our population gets older. But now there's guns to meet that. You don't, I understand modifying guns and building your own special version of whatever. But if you're looking for a especially defensive firearm, but you're having hand issues or strength issues, there's guns for you now, and they work pretty good. They work all the time. They were designed by those guys and gals that got the big brains on them.
Oh, I think that's one of the things that brought me into the gunsmithing world. When I was a kid, we didn't have pocket 9mm guns. We didn't have anything that we have really.
Left-hand guns at all?
Yeah. I mean, I remember not too long ago, I was doing some research and I found an early handgunner from 76 or 7, right when we first started. And it said, well, roundup of police semi-autos. Well, it was Browning High Power, 1911, Walther P38.
Yeah.
And Smith and Wesson Model 39. And that was it.
Yeah.
That's all there was. And so I remember in the 80s, I think it was the 80s, late 80s, or Tim LaFrance, who was this guy in San Diego who built, he had a business called LaFrance Specialties, and he was this like idiot savant gunsmith guy. He built guns for the movies too. He built Arnold Schwarzenegger's phony big gun that he had when Arnold was like a Russian cop, Red Heat. Is that what it was called? I can't remember the name of that movie. Yeah. But so he used to build all these crazy guns for the movies. And so he took that into the real gun world too. And he used to make something called a Nova. And what he did was he would take a Star BM.
PD.
Yeah, well, like a Star PD, but a Star BM. So it was a 9mm. Might be the BKM is the lightweight one, but it was an aluminum frame, single stack. It was like a thin, smaller 1911 style gun. They were wonderful guns, but they suffered from the Spanish gun making at the time, so the parts were erratic and soft and stuff. But Tim would cut the grip frame off and shorten the slide and just modify the hell out of this gun and end up with this pocket 9mm. Which just blew all our minds because there was nothing like that. And he got a lot of money for them. I mean, they were like $1,800 back in those days. I mean, they were an insane amount of money. Of course, nowadays, everybody makes one.
Yeah,
Springfield
exactly.
Armory. I mean, everybody makes one. Ruger makes one. Everybody has one, And so you're right. If you just like, gee, I wish I had a good pocket gun, just go buy one.
Yeah.
But if you've got the urge to create a custom gun for some reason, well then, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why the guys like Hamilton Bowen and a lot of these custom pistol smiths exist. It's just because, I've done a lot of custom pistol work over the years with revolvers, and somebody wants a barrel a certain length, and they want a hammer shaped a certain way, and they want the front of the cylinder chamfered, and they want a certain sight, and they want certain grips, and they want a trigger guard shaped a certain way, and that those things you usually can't buy. And I think that's part of the delight of having the skills to be able to do that. If you can imagine it, then you can make it, but just don't get ahead of yourself,
Well, and I think that's something that I've learned in my editorship here is if you want, say a new barrel, instead of trying to find somebody that might know how to do it, it's pretty easy to find like the guy or the company that does that in this day and age, especially with the internet. Again, nothing against my down the block gunsmith, but if I've got a company that does cuts new chambers every day, all day long, and has really smart and experienced people, sometimes on some of that stuff, it's better even is just send it to them and say, do this. And it's just so much easier to do that now.
So much easier. And I do that. It's like, hey, somebody wants this rechambered to that. I'll send it off. Hamilton Bowen will line bore this cylinder and understand it way more than I do.
Yep.
Yep. And the other thing that brings up a good point, which is drop-in parts. And we're getting better at it because if you have a relatively modern gun that's made on CNCs and you buy a modern drop-in part for it, literally 99.9% of the time it is.
Yeah.
And it'll work. Apex Tactical makes these drop-in trigger kits,
right?
And they're absolutely marvelous. I mean, take your Glock, Smith & Wesson, Ruger, whatever it is, buy an Apex trigger kit, put it in it, and I promise you will love it. And they make great how-to videos on their website that you can walk your way through. Just take your time, and but if you have an old, World War II era 1911 and you buy somebody's drop-in target barrel, that's going to be a crapshoot.
Yep.
And now there are a few things though that are really remarkable. Nighthawk Custom makes a drop-in trigger kit.
Yes.
And I have to say, I am so impressed by it. And that's what I tell people is they say, hey, what do I do about this really crummy action I have on my 1911? I just say, go to Nighthawk Custom's website and buy one of these trigger kits. And then you literally just take you detail strip your gun, you push this assembly in, use your existing pins, you put it back together, and suddenly you've got this 3.5 pound crispy, beautiful action. And it really is drop in. I've tried it on probably 15 or 20 guns of all kinds, works on every single one of them. And so and there's nothing wrong with that. When sometimes I do action jobs on 1911s and I tell people right up front, what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a Nighthawk custom trigger kit. I'm going to install that for you and then do a safety check and make sure it works. And then
they've got a company and they've got experience and all the top end machines. Makes some sense there, doesn't it?
Take advantage of that, and then you'll look good too. So, hey, a couple of things before we wind up, if you don't mind, is that the importance of your library is that let Amazon.com be your friend here. What you want to do is you want to go on there and find all of the old JB Woods Gun Digest based assembly, disassembly manuals, because everything is not online. And even if it is online, it's good to have a backup and something you can compare with. Two heads are always better than one head. So, but all these books tell you revolvers, rifles, rimfires, semi-autos, and then it tells you assembly, disassembly of so many different kinds. It's amazing. And I probably have 20 or 25 different versions of those books.
Yeah.
So chances are pretty good if I get some kind of weirdo old 22 and sometimes they were really complicated. You can't just figure it out.
Yeah.
It'll be in one of these books, and it'll really save you. And then there are a lot of YouTube videos. Before you jump right in watching a YouTube video, though, and doing what they're saying, I would find 2 or 3 or 4 more and watch them too, because then you'll get a sense of who actually really knows what they're doing.
That's exactly what I do.
Yeah, if he comes out with his ball peen hammer and his
Dremel tool
and his Dremel tool, then it's like step away from the YouTube thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I think, I wrote an insider about this a couple of issues ago, and it was called Practice on a Plane. And what I mean by that is that if you go to the local junk store and buy yourself a couple of old $15 Stanley planes, the old rusty wood plane, just a wood plane, and then learn how to restore them. In other words, learn about how do you remove the rust, learn how do you polish the metal and flatten it, how do you refinish the wood, how do you chase the threads to make sure that they're clean, how do you adjust it, how do you flatten the sole on it, how do you work the nicks off, out of the metal and stuff like that. And all of those are skills that directly translate to gunsmith work. And so the beauty of this is that you can completely mess up a $15 plane and it's okay. You didn't mess up your $400 Ruger, Blackhawk or something like that. So polish your skills, as it were, on a couple of old planes, and then it'll give you, learn how to fix the buggered up screws, learn how to, do all the things that you need to do to get back up and running. And there's a whole world of those too, by the way, on YouTube. So there's all the other idiots like me that spend time restoring planes. So there you go. And buy our DIY gunsmithing books that are on Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why search out when we've got them all right there?
They're all right there. And all the articles were all written in blood.
Do we bring up, this is so, it's semi-blasphemous, and I don't mean it be, but the Jesus spring. I learned about that. I was a Smith & Wesson auto pistol armorer back in the day, and, the 4506 and the 659s and all that stuff. And they don't even make them anymore. I always said the 4506 was the largest handgun in captivity, but that was our duty gun for a while. And I was an armorer, but I learned.
They used to make them. They used to call them the gun of the week from Smith & Wesson. Yeah. They made so many SKUs. Yeah. It was amazing. Yeah.
But explain what an oh my gosh or a Jesus spring is.
Well, that's directly an integral part of that is the gunsmith's prayer. Which is, and it goes something like this: you're doing this assembly on this like really stupidly overcomplicated 22 receiver assembly. The old Remington nylon 66s are like this.
Yeah.
You take the little action plate off and you think, oh, that came off really easy. Yep. And then it all falls apart in your hand, and there are all these little tiny springs and little tiny stamped metal parts and all that kind of stuff. So it's 2:00 in the morning. Your customer's coming tomorrow. He needs the gun because he's going deer hunting or something, and you've got a little spring, and you're compressing it to put into a trigger, and it goes ping,
boing,
and you hear it bounce off the ceiling, and then you hear it bounce off your truck, right? And then it's silent.
Yeah.
And you look at the floor and you realize you haven't swept the garage floor in a month, right? So there's dirt balls and rat poo and, dog puke and everything, and it's like, oh man. So what do? You get down on your hands and knees with a flashlight, which, by the way, lay a flashlight on the ground and let it shine across the ground, because then all the stuff shows and you realize just how much crud you have on the floor. And then you assume the gunsmith's prayer, which is on your hands and knees until you find the spring. Which brings us, though, to a very important part of this, and that is that if you go to the wondrous place called Brownells or Midway, you'll see that they have bag after bag after bag of assorted springs and assorted sight screws and assorted, sight ladders. And so ask me if my shelf has, 25 of these little plastic boxes full of every little spring you can think of, every little thing, and save every spring you ever find in your life. Like when you're going to garage sales and you see an old baby food jar and it's all full of old springs, buy it.
Yeah.
Take it home, put it in your big spring box. And then the other thing, the single most useful spring for any gunsmith in the world is a ballpoint pen spring. The clicking you hear, it clicks for a reason, and that there are various sizes of these great little springs, and I've used them for so many things, holding sights together, trigger return springs.
The deep dark secrets of the gunsmith.
That's it. They always say, Roy, you're just a miracle. It's like, no, that would be Bic.
Wow. Well, that's a great tip to end things on. So, Roy, I hate to keep you out of your shop. I'm sure you've got a whole line of guns that are waiting for your ministrations, as they say.
I can hardly wait to get back to it. So you bet.
Thanks for talking to us.
All right, buddy. Thanks a lot.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you're still down on your hands and knees under the desk looking for a missing rear sight screw, I just remind you to watch your head when you finally stand back up. And with that, we hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Please tell all your friends, even those gloating liberals. Guns Magazine is #1 in the business, and we're using our decades of friendships to bring you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got questions or comments, please drop me a line. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you don't miss out by subscribing to us on your favorite podcatcher and on YouTube. Of course, you can always listen and download our episodes at gunsmagazine.com, and we'd all appreciate it if you'd share a favorite episode or two on your own social media channels. And while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publication, American Handgunner Magazine, at americanhandgunner.com. That's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of our hardworking staff here at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.